she's back.
Resident Evil 7 is launching very soon, although it feels like no time at all since it was announced. In that time though, there's been so much chat about some of the more controversial aspects of 7's development, most notably how it's moved away from previous series iterations with a first-person perspective. A lot of people are saying that this, plus a few other changes, mean that Resident Evil 7 just isn't Resident Evil anymore. But although the definition of what a Resident Evil game actually is changes wildly from person to person, I have to say, I disagree. Resident Evil 7 is very Resident Evil, and I'll explain why with everything you need to know about the game before you pick up a controller.
Where do you think you're going?
So Resident Evil 7 Biohazard isn't a remake or a rehash of a previous franchise storyline, but instead is something completely new, but also very familiar. Set 4 years after the events of Resident Evil 6, the new game takes place in the backwater swamps of Louisiana, where the player character, an everyman named Ethan, is searching for his wife Mia, who seems to have been abducted by a family of bizarre and dangerous hillbillies. It's all very Texas Chainsaw Massacre, basically. What this means, though, is that the story has been scaled way back. From a globe-trotting tale of international bioterrorism involving special agents jumping out of exploding helicopters to a personal sort of peril set entirely in one, smaller but very dense location. This is an entirely deliberate move by Capcom, as 7's executive producer Jun Takeuchi told me. I think of it as a macro to micro shift, he said, because the scale of global bioterrorism events from the previous games is so massive that there's almost nowhere bigger to go. So by shifting the focus and spotlight onto a single average person in a single house, well, it's more than one building, but you know, a single location, I think we really want to give you a chance to see that. The reasoning for scaling back makes sense to me. When you have special agents who no longer bat an eyelid when faced with zombies or giant insects or mutating humans, and who can literally punch boulders into submission, you lose the ability to scare. And by prioritizing gunplay and action-heavy set pieces, you lose focus on building atmosphere and on the cryptic puzzle solving that used to be a hallmark of the series. Puzzle solving has a big part to play in 7 though. I've played roughly about 5 hours of the game, which apparently is about a third of its overall runtime. And what really stood out to me was its emphasis on the kind of features that I really loved about the older Resident Evil games. Puzzle solving, inventory management, the need to really study your surroundings, pick up on clues, and literally examine items to point you in the right direction. I think it's important to note at this point that I don't think the tone of the puzzles featured in the free beginning Twilight Midnight Hour demo at all reflects the quality of the puzzles in the main game. The demo was unnecessarily abstract, and without the help of the internet, most people, myself included, would never have solved the 5 murders. Puzzles in the main game, while still offering a decent challenge, are logical and won't require crowdsourcing to solve. Combining items is also an important mechanic, one that plays into the combat of the game. And guys, the combat is good. It's satisfying and it feels like every bullet counts. Another major complaint that's been levelled at 7 is that the enemies are, well, they aren't zombies, and there are less of them. Now that might technically be true, although it kind of depends on how strict you are with your definition of zombie, but I think the changes are for the best. Your bread and butter enemies are the molded, gross, gloopy, tower-like foes who kind of resemble the regenerators from Resident Evil 4. They are creepy, and though they won't appear too often so as not to dilute their impact, they can take quite a number of bullets to bring down. Unless you aim for the head and get wise to combining items to create stronger, more effective ammunition.
Where am I? What the hell?
Rise and shine, sleepyhead.
The molded didn't show up all by themselves though. They are being created, somehow, by the Baker family. They're those dangerous hillbillies I mentioned earlier. They are another challenge entirely, as regular combat won't defeat them.
That gun is not gonna work the way you think it will.
For some of the time, you'll have to hide and avoid them completely. In fact, in the very early stages of the game, you'll be completely helpless against them, having to duck or run rather than fight. Bear in mind though, if stealth horror isn't appealing to you, and that's understandable, the game is pretty forgiving if you are found. If spotted, at least in the early stages of the game, it isn't the end of the world. You might well take a few knocks, but it won't be an instant game over, and you'll usually have enough space and twists and turns in the environment to give your pursuer the slip without too much hassle. I get the feeling we'll become much more powerful later in the game though. A couple of hours in, I found an area that offers unlockable upgrades in return for coins you can find stashed across the baker's creepy old compound. The upgrades all kind of focus on improving your combat experience, including, but not limited to, extra permanent health for Ethan and, of course, the trusty old Magnum revolver.
I told you to stay out of here!
As a related side note, and it probably has something to do with the more photorealistic look that Capcom is going for, this game is so much gorier than previous entries. So much so that a couple of the scenes I've encountered have been modified for Japanese audiences.
This was supposed to be a very special feast. Come on, boy.
Also, I really didn't feel like the first-person perspective got in the way of the old-school Resident Evil atmosphere. A lot of trailers for the game have focused on combat because, well, it just looks more exciting, but the moments in between the fighting, spent exploring or just listening to the creaking of the house, wondering what's around the next corner, or just plain noping your way out of a suspicious-looking setup, are all the more threatening because of the perspective. Despite how awkward they could feel, people often defended the tank controls by saying that they added to the player's vulnerability, whether they were originally the result of design limitations or not. A first-person view, with limited perception and slow turning speed, does a very similar job here, but it feels much more comfortable along with modern control schemes. Really, it just makes sense. And in VR, it's utterly terrifying. So, what else do you need to know about Resident Evil 7? Well, the VHS tapes are really fun, although fun probably isn't the right word. Putting them into a VHS player will trigger a playable standalone section with a different protagonist. And free of the main story, these sequences are more experimental and perhaps even scarier than the main game. Also, the developers have said that even though classic Resident Evil characters like Chris and Jill and Claire aren't featured in 7, as far as we know, they are still out there in the game world. And lots of items and files you can find in the game point to Umbrella and to past events in the series. And, potential spoiler warning here by the way, so turn away now if you don't want to hear it. A data mine of the PC version of the demo unearthed files that include the name Albert. So it's possible at least one long-running character might be making a return. Mind you, the person responsible for the data mine said that they had a feeling the Albert files referred to obtaining Wesker's weapons rather than an appearance to the man/monster himself. So treat all this with a pinch of salt. Other in-game files hinted at bad and true endings, another staple of the series. And that's everything you need to know basically. Resident Evil 7 seems like it'll be a good jumping in point for those who aren't totally familiar with past Resident Evil entries, as it casts you as a clueless outsider rather than a government agent. But that said, the game still pays plenty of attention to longtime series fans. What I'm saying is, as someone who's been there from the very beginning, stepping inside the Arklay mansion after a beautifully awful live-action intro, I was pleasantly surprised by what I played of 7. Give it a chance and it might surprise you too. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and a subscribe, and stay tuned to more from Eurogamer. Bye!